Today, I run a global corporation, but 18 years ago, I was sobbing on a cold airport floor, hollow with hunger. That day, my mother and brother abandoned me to fly to Tokyo on my tickets. They thought I'd disappear so they could claim the entire inheritance. But when their plane landed, instead of a luxury hotel, they were met with handcuffs. Want to know how I turned my darkest humiliation into their total downfall? Listen until the end. Those 7 words, spoken by a tall stranger in a flowing charcoal robe, changed the trajectory of my life forever. Come with me. Trust me, they will regret this. I was huddled on the polished floor of Istanbul airport, trembling and hollow with hunger, utterly alone. He came to a halt right in front of me, looking down at a sobbing American girl surrounded by high-end boutiques where even the air seemed too expensive to breathe. But I need to go back 4 hours to the moment I realized my own mother had walked away and left me behind. I was 14 years old, standing at the gate, watching the plane to Tokyo taxi down the runway with my family on board, and me very much not. I was just a scrawny kid in a baggy t-shirt, slowly grasping the reality that my mother had listened to my brother's lies and stepped onto that aircraft without a single backward glance. She hadn't lost me in the bustle or gotten turned around. She had left me on purpose. 4 hours later, when the authorities reached her in Japan, when she learned what her golden boy had actually been orchestrating, when she realized this wasn't about a family getaway but about $600,000, her face turned the color of ash. To understand why that devastating moment was actually the greatest gift I ever received, you have to understand how invisible I had been my entire life. My name is Lily Miller. I'm 32 now, and I head a successful international trade firm. But back then, at 14, I was little more than a background character in my own family. You know those people who command a room just by entering it? I was the opposite. I was human wallpaper, the kind of child who could sit at the dinner table and somehow still go unnoticed. My mother, Sarah, worked grueling double shifts as a hospital administrator. She had been doing it since my father passed away when I was 6. His death shattered us, but my mother was convinced it hit my brother, Jackson, the hardest. From that day on, Jackson became the man of the house in her eyes. He was 3 years older than me, a star quarterback with a perfect smile that made teachers overlook his missed assignments. He could do no wrong. I mean that quite literally, in 17 years, I never once saw my mother hold him accountable for anything. If something broke, I was the culprit. If money went missing, I must have taken it. If there was a conflict, I was the instigator. I learned early on that defending myself was a lost cause. So, I became the easy child, the quiet one who never complained, never asked for anything, and never made waves. I thought if I stayed small enough, good enough, and quiet enough, my mother would eventually truly see me. She never did. My grandmother, Martha, lived in Austin, about 3 hours from our home in Dallas. Jackson used to stay with her during the summers while Mom picked up extra shifts. Martha was the only person who seemed to acknowledge my existence. She'd mail me books, call me on my birthday when Mom was too busy, and tell me stories about my father. But as she grew older, I saw her less than I wanted. The summer I turned 14, the dynamic shifted. I was accepted into a prestigious arts academy on a full scholarship. It was a massive achievement, the kind of thing that should have made a parent beam with pride. For one fleeting moment, the light was on me. Jackson loathed it. He didn't say it outright, but his resentment was like a cold draft in a warm room. He started dropping comments about how art was a dead end, how I'd probably embarrass the family, and how the scholarship was likely a clerical error. My mother never stood up for me. She just changed the subject. About a week before our trip, I came home early from school and overheard Jackson in his room. The door was slightly ajar, and he was on a call. "The trust fund," he said. "She can't find out. Once I hit 18, it's settled." I stepped on a creaky floorboard, and he lunged out, slamming the door behind him. "Were you spying on me?" His face was flushed with rage. "I just got home, Jackson." "I wasn't." "Stay out of my business, Lily. I mean it." He shoved past me and headed downstairs. I stood there, bewildered. What trust fund? What was he talking about? I didn't understand it then. I wish I had. A few days later, we set off on our big family vacation. Mom had won a trip to Japan through a hospital charity raffle. It was our first real trip in years, and I was genuinely thrilled. 2 weeks of exploring Tokyo and the coast. Our route took us from Dallas to Istanbul for a 6-hour layover, then on to Japan. I packed light, just 1 suitcase. Jackson brought 3. I remember joking to myself about it, how I'd learned not to take up space, even in the cargo hold. The flight to Istanbul was long, but I spent it immersed in books and movies. Jackson and Mom sat together a few rows ahead. Every so often, I'd see them sharing a laugh, and I'd feel that familiar sting of being the outsider, but I pushed it down. When we landed in Istanbul, I was exhausted but mesmerized. The airport was like a palace of glass and steel. There were luxury shops and restaurants that looked like movie sets. I wandered around in awe, feeling like a commoner who had accidentally wandered into a royal court. My outfit didn't help. I was in an old band t-shirt and jeans that were a bit too long. I looked exactly like what I was, a lost 14-year-old from Texas. Jackson suggested we split up to explore the terminal. He said he'd take Mom to look at the jewelry shops and told me I could check out the bookstore. I was actually relieved. I wanted the solitude. Before I walked away, Jackson offered to take my backpack. "You don't want to lug that around," he said. "I'll keep it with the rest of our bags." My passport was in that bag. My boarding pass was there, along with $40 my grandmother had tucked into my hand before we left. I handed it over without a second thought. Why wouldn't I trust my brother? I wish I could go back and tell that girl to hold onto that bag as if her life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. I spent some time in the bookstore and then headed back to our designated meeting spot. Jackson and my mother were nowhere to be found. I waited 30 minutes, then an hour. I told myself they'd just lost track of time, but a cold knot was tightening in my chest. Finally, I approached an information desk. The woman behind the counter checked the system and looked at me with a pained expression. "That flight has already departed, honey. It's in the air." "No, that's impossible. My family is on that flight. I'm supposed to be with them." She checked again. Sarah Miller boarded. Jackson Miller boarded. Lily Miller, marked as a no-show. My heart didn't just drop, it stopped. My vision went blurry at the edges. They had left me. My mother and my brother had boarded a plane and flown to the other side of the world without me. And as I stood there, paralyzed, I had no idea that in less than 2 hours, I would find out exactly why. The terminal in Istanbul was a fever dream of marble and light. It felt less like an airport and more like a fortress of modern luxury. The restrooms alone had better lighting than my entire high school back in Texas. I wandered past boutiques filled with designer silks and gold jewelry, feeling like a stray cat that had somehow slipped into a royal palace. My appearance only deepened the contrast. I was wearing an oversized grunge band t-shirt and a pair of jeans that were a half-inch too long because I'd found them on a clearance rack. I looked exactly like what I was, a bewildered 14-year-old who didn't belong in a place this grand. Jackson was the one who suggested we split up during the long layover. He told Mom he'd take her to see the high-end jewelry displays near the center of the terminal, and suggested I go find a bookstore to stay out of their hair. I was actually grateful for the suggestion. Moments of peace were rare in my family, and I looked forward to an hour of solitude. Before we parted ways, Jackson reached for my backpack. "Don't lug that heavy thing around the whole airport," he said, his voice smooth and helpful. "I'll keep it with the rest of the carry-ons. It'll be safer with me." My passport was in that bag. So was my boarding pass and the emergency $40 my grandmother had pressed into my palm before we left Dallas. I handed it over without a second thought. Why wouldn't I trust my own brother? I wish I could reach back through time, grab that girl by the shoulders, and scream at her to hold onto that bag as if her life depended on it. Because, in a very real way, it did. I spent 20 minutes browsing the shelves of a bookstore and then made my way back to our designated meeting point near the gate. Jackson and my mother were gone. I waited, checking my watch every few minutes. 30 minutes passed, then 45. I tried to convince myself they had simply lost track of time or gotten caught up in a purchase, but a sickening weight was settling in my stomach. Finally, I walked up to the information desk and asked about the flight to Tokyo. The agent typed a few commands into her keyboard, her expression shifting from professional to concerned. "That flight finished boarding 10 minutes ago," she said softly. "It's already taxiing for takeoff." "No, that can't be right," I stammered. "My family is on that plane. I'm supposed to be with them." She checked the manifest again. "Sarah Miller is on board. Jackson Miller is on board. Lily Miller was marked as a no-show." My heart didn't just sink, it felt like it had been carved out of my chest. My vision went narrow and dark at the edges. I had to ask her to repeat it twice more before the reality finally pierced my brain. They had left me. My mother and my brother had boarded an international flight and flown toward Japan, leaving me stranded in a foreign country. I stood at that desk, paralyzed. The woman was saying something, asking if I was okay, asking for a contact number, but her voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. My family had abandoned me. My own mother had walked onto a plane and flown away from her 14-year-old daughter. A security officer approached, his expression stern but not unkind. He asked for my identification. "I don't have it," I whispered. "My brother has it." "Your boarding pass?" "He has that, too." The officer exchanged a look with the gate agent. I could see them doing the math. An unaccompanied minor, no documents, no family, and no explanation. I wouldn't find out until much later exactly how Jackson had pulled it off. When I had headed toward the bookstore, he had gone straight to the gate agents. He told them I was traveling with other relatives on a later flight because our tickets had been booked separately through a hospital charity prize. Since we weren't on a single group booking, there were no red flags. The agents simply checked their names and let them through. But the real betrayal had happened minutes before that. He had turned to our mother and told her a devastating lie. He claimed I'd had a massive breakdown in the terminal. He told her I'd been talking to some older boy I'd met online, and that I was refusing to get on the plane because I was going to meet him in the city. He told her I'd screamed at him, said I hated the family, and told them to leave me alone forever. My mother, exhausted, stressed, and conditioned by a decade of believing every word that came out of Jackson's mouth, took his side instantly. She didn't come looking for me. She didn't try to call me. She simply tightened her jaw in a fit of self-righteous fury and followed her son onto the plane. She thought she was teaching me a lesson about gratitude and consequences. She had no idea she was leaving her child defenseless in a massive international hub because her son was a sociopath. But I knew none of that then. All I knew was the crushing weight of being alone. I had no passport. Jackson had it. I had no money. My cash was in the bag he'd taken. I didn't even have a phone. My mother had confiscated it before we left Texas to ensure I had a digital detox during the trip. I didn't even know her phone number by heart. Like any other kid, I relied on my contact list for everything. I was a ghost in a palace of gold, and for the first time in my life, being invisible wasn't just a feeling, it was a death sentence. I couldn't even recall my mother's phone number. Like most teenagers, I lived through my contacts list. I knew it started with a Dallas area code, but beyond that, the digits were a blur. An airline employee managed to pull her information from the flight manifest and tried the number. It went straight to voicemail. She had switched her phone to airplane mode like a dutiful passenger. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. Security officers kept firing questions at me. Where was I from? Where were my parents? Did I have any relatives in Turkey? Was there anyone at all I could call? I had no answers, only tears, sharp bursts of panic, and the hollow realization that I was utterly alone in one of the largest transit hubs on the planet. They eventually led me to a cramped security office while they debated what to do with a 14-year-old girl who didn't officially exist in their system. A woman offered me a cup of water and some tissues, but I could see the flicker of stress in her eyes. I wasn't just a lost child, I was a liability, an international incident in the making. I sat in that chair for what felt like hours, though it was likely less than 40 minutes. My mind was a frantic loop of the same questions. Why would Jackson do this? Why didn't Mom look for me? And then, a memory surfaced, unbidden and cold. Jackson's voice through the door, the trust fund. She can't find out. Once I turn 18, it's settled. Jackson was turning 18 in 3 months. I knew nothing about a trust fund. My mother never spoke about my father's estate, only that he'd left us a comfortable, and that she worked herself to the bone to keep us that way. But Jackson knew. He'd been sitting on a secret, and now he had dumped me in Istanbul just weeks before he was legally able to touch the money. This wasn't a sibling prank gone wrong. This was calculated. This was a disposal. Eventually, the officers ran out of questions. They told me to wait in the main concourse while they coordinated with the American consulate. I wandered dazed through the crowds until I found a quiet corner near a cafe and slid down against the cold marble wall. The tears came then, heavy and unstoppable. I tried to muffle the sound with my hands, desperate not to draw attention, but the grief was too big. I watched families stream past. I saw a father scoop up his toddler when she tripped, kissing the top of her head as he set her back on her feet. It was such a small, reflexive gesture of love. I couldn't remember the last time my mother had touched me with that kind of effortless tenderness. Maybe Jackson was right. Maybe I was just a burden. A mistake the family was better off without. My stomach let out a sharp, painful growl. I hadn't eaten in nearly 10 hours. The last thing I'd had was a dry airplane roll somewhere over the Atlantic. I looked up at the glowing storefronts of Prada and Chanel. The airport was a cathedral of wealth, and I was sitting on the floor with exactly $0 to my name. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. In a movie, this is where the plucky heroine would discover a hidden talent or outsmart a villain. My only real skill was knowing how to disappear so I wouldn't bother anyone. I was a ghost in a designer terminal. The minutes dragged on. I pressed my back harder against the wall, trying to shrink into the stone. I had spent my whole life trying to be invisible for my family's sake. Now, for the first time, I desperately wanted someone to see me. A shadow fell over me. I looked up. A tall man stood there, perhaps in his late 50s. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, with a silk scarf draped over his shoulders. He had a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard and eyes that were dark, steady, and remarkably kind. He looked like a man of immense influence, the kind of person who likely owned the very stores I couldn't afford to enter, but he wasn't looking at me with pity or judgment. "Young lady," he said, his English accented but perfectly fluid. "You look like someone in need of a friend, and I believe I know how to be one." Every survival instinct my mother had ever drilled into me screamed danger. A stranger. A foreign country. A girl alone. This was the exact scenario she had warned me about since I was old enough to walk. Don't trust anyone. The world is full of people waiting to hurt you. But my mother had just abandoned me in an airport, so her advice didn't feel particularly valid anymore. The man didn't crowd me. He sat on a nearby bench, maintaining a respectful distance, as if he understood that I was a cornered animal. "My name is Arif Kara," he said calmly. "I am the director of guest relations for this airport. I noticed you from across the terminal. You reminded me of someone." I wiped my face with the back of my hand, my voice trembling. "Who?" "My daughter," he replied softly. "She passed away 5 years ago. She was 15. She had that same look in her eyes, the look of someone trying very hard to be invisible so that no one sees her pain." The raw honesty of his words caught me off guard. This wasn't the opening line of a predator. It was the grief of a father. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He inclined his head. "Thank you." Her name was Iller. She had a heart condition from birth. We knew our time was limited, but that does not make the silence any easier. He looked at me with those unwavering eyes. "Now, will you tell me why you are sitting on the floor of my airport, crying?" Something about the way he said my airport, not as a boast, but as a promise of protection, made me break. Against everything I'd been taught, I started to talk. I spilled everything. I told him about Jackson, about the elaborate lies he'd spun, and how my mother had swallowed them without a second thought. I told him about the crushing realization of being marked as a no-showy while my family flew toward Tokyo. I told him I had no passport, no money, no phone, and no way to reach the outside world. Finally, I mentioned the conversation I'd overheard, the one about a trust fund that Jackson seemed so desperate to keep hidden. Arif listened in silence. His expression grew more somber with every detail, but he didn't look shocked. He looked like a man who had seen the darker corners of human nature and recognized the pattern emerging. When I finished, he sat back, his eyes dark with a quiet fury. "What happened to you," he said slowly, "is not just cruel. It is potentially criminal. Abandoning a minor in an international hub, coupled with the deliberate theft of travel documents, is a grave matter under international law." My heart skipped a beat. "Criminal? You mean they could go to jail?" He nodded solemnly. "It is a very serious violation. Importantly, you are a child who needs protection, and I am going to ensure you receive it." He stood up and extended his hand toward me. "Come with me. Trust me, Lily. They will regret what they have done." I hesitated for a heartbeat. Every alarm bell in my head was still ringing, but something deeper, something instinctive, told me I was safe with him. Maybe it was the way he spoke of his daughter. Maybe it was the respectful distance he kept. Or maybe I was just too broken to do anything else. I reached out and took his hand. "First," he said as we began to walk, "we need to get you somewhere secure and get some food in you. When did you last eat?" "I don't know. Maybe 10 hours ago." He made a sharp sound of disapproval. "That will not do at all. Come." Arif led me through corridors I hadn't known existed, private staff passages, administrative wings, and quiet offices that functioned as the hidden nervous system of the airport. He spoke to security guards along the way, and they all stepped aside with respectful nods. I realized then that while Arif might not have the power to launch a global investigation on his own, he knew exactly whose buttons to push to make things happen. He was a man of immense influence, and he was firmly on my side. We ended up in a comfortable administrative suite, with soft lighting and deep chairs. A woman named Layla, with a kind face and a calm demeanor, sat with me while Arif stepped into the next room to make a series of phone calls. "You are safe now, sweetheart," Layla said, handing me a tray from the staff kitchen. It was seasoned chicken, fragrant rice, and warm, fresh flatbread. "Whatever has happened, you are under our roof now." I ate with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. That meal was the best thing I had ever tasted. Hunger truly is the most potent seasoning. While I ate, I could hear Arif's voice through the door. It was calm but carried a weight of authority that seemed to make the very walls vibrate. "This is Director Kara. I need the security footage from gates 12 through 18. Timestamp 14:30 to 4 p.m. Yes, immediately. We have an abandoned minor. Her documents were stolen by a family member." I stopped chewing. Deliberately abandoned. Hearing a stranger say those words made the reality of it sink in like a stone in water. My brother hadn't just made a mistake. He hadn't just been mean. He had planned this. An hour later, Arif called me into his office to see the proof. His colleagues had pulled the high-definition security feeds. I watched the screen as a younger version of myself walked toward the restrooms. I watched Jackson wait until I was out of sight before unzipping my backpack. With a small, chillingly deliberate smile, he reached in and pulled out my passport and boarding pass. He tucked them into his own bag, zipped it shut, and walked away as if he were simply waiting for a bus. Then the footage cut to the gate. I saw Jackson whispering urgently into our mother's ear. I saw her face twist with a sudden, sharp anger. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line of fury, and turned toward the jet bridge. She didn't look back. Not once. Jackson followed her, and just before he stepped through the door, he cast one final glance back toward the terminal. He was smiling. Seeing it on the screen felt like a physical blow to the chest. I had known they were gone, but seeing the lack of hesitation in my mother's stride and the triumph in my brother's eyes broke something inside me that I didn't know how to fix. "The evidence is undeniable," Arif said, sitting across from me. "There is no ambiguity here. Your brother stole your identity documents and systematically separated you from your family. Your mother failed to verify his story. This is a clear case of child abandonment." I nodded, feeling numb. "Now," he continued, "I must ask you something. You mentioned a trust fund. You said your brother was concerned about money. Do you have any idea what your father left behind?" I shook my head. Mom never talked about it. She just said Dad left enough to keep us afloat. I thought she meant the house and some savings. Arif looked at me thoughtfully. Sometimes, he said gently, people reveal their true nature when they believe no one is watching. Your brother has revealed his. The question now, Lily, is what you intend to do with that knowledge. I didn't have an answer. I was 14, exhausted, and heartbroken. What could I possibly do? But somewhere deep inside, a small, cold flame of anger was beginning to flicker. It wasn't the wild, screaming rage of a child, it was something steadier. Something more dangerous. My father used to call me his a hidden gem. I'd never understood it. Hidden from what? But sitting in that office, looking at Arif, I began to realize that my father had seen the cracks in our family long ago. He had known I would need protection, even from the people who were supposed to love me. Arif's phone rang. He answered, spoke rapidly in his native tongue, and then turned back to me with a sharp light in his eyes. The flight to Tokyo is still in the air, he said. They land in approximately 90 minutes. I have already coordinated with the authorities in Japan and the American consulate here. When that plane touches down, your mother and brother will be met by the police. My stomach did a slow roll. The police? Abandoning a child is a felony, Lily. International abandonment with the theft of documents is even more severe. You have a choice now. We can arrange for you to simply fly home and pretend this never happened. Or he gave a small, grim smile. You can choose to let justice take its course. And I promise you, they will regret what they have done. I thought about my mother's back as she walked away from me. I thought about Jackson's smile. I want to watch, I said. Arif picked up the phone. This is Director Kara. Alert the International Police Coordination Office. We have a confirmed case. I want the authorities waiting at the gate in Tokyo. They are not to let those passengers leave the terminal. The footage felt like a physical blow to the chest. I had known intellectually that they were gone, but seeing it, witnessing Jackson's triumphant smile and my mother's total lack of hesitation, shattered something deep inside me. This is undeniable evidence, Arif said, leaning back in his chair. There is no room for doubt. Your brother stole your travel documents and systematically separated you from your family. Your mother made no effort to verify his claims. This is abandonment, plain and simple. I nodded, feeling a strange numbness settle over me. Now, he continued, I must ask you something. You mentioned a trust fund. You said your brother was preoccupied with money. Do you know anything about your father's estate? I shook my head. Mom never talked about the specifics. She just said Dad left enough for us to be comfortable. I assumed that meant the house and some savings. Arif was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady. Sometimes, he said carefully, siblings do terrible things to protect what they believe belongs only to them. Sometimes parents leave behind more than just furniture and bank accounts. And sometimes, those legacies become weapons. I thought about Jackson, about the muffled phone call I'd overheard through the bedroom door. She can't find out. Once I turn 18, it's settled. My brother turns 18 in 3 months, I said slowly, the pieces finally clicking into place. He was talking about a trust fund, something he can access the moment he's legally an adult. Arif nodded. When you return home, you must look into your father's records. Ask questions. Find out exactly what he left behind and who he intended it for. You think this whole thing is about money? I think, he said gently, that people reveal their true character when they believe no one is watching. Your brother has shown you who he is. The question now is what you will do with that knowledge. I didn't have an answer. I was 14, exhausted, and sitting in an office thousands of miles from the only life I knew. What could I possibly do? But somewhere in the hollow space where my heart used to be, a small flame of anger began to flicker. It wasn't the hot, wild rage of a child. It was cold and steady. My father used to call me his hidden gem. I had never understood what he meant. Hidden from what? Hidden from whom? Now, sitting in that quiet office, I was starting to grasp it. My father had seen the cracks in our family long before I did. He'd known I would need protection, and he had tried, in his own way, to provide it. I just hadn't found it yet. Arif's phone rang. He answered, speaking rapidly in his own language, then turned to me with a sharp, focused expression. The flight to Tokyo is still in the air, he said. They land in approximately 90 minutes. I have already coordinated with the authorities in Japan and the American consulate here in Istanbul. When that plane touches down, your mother and brother will be met by the police. My stomach did a slow roll. The police? Abandoning a minor is a serious crime, Lily. International abandonment involving the theft of identity documents is even more severe. He paused, giving me a moment to breathe. You have a choice now. We can arrange for you to fly home quietly, and you can try to pretend this never happened. Or, he offered a small, grim smile, you can choose to let justice take its course. And believe me when I tell you, they will regret what they have done. I thought about my mother's face on that security monitor. The way she hadn't even paused. The way she hadn't looked back. I thought about Jackson's smile. I want to watch, I said. Arif picked up the desk phone and dialed. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room feel charged. This is Director Kara. Connect me with the International Police Coordination Office and the U.S. Embassy immediately. We have a confirmed case of child abandonment. The suspects are currently on the flight to Tokyo. I want authorities waiting at the gate. They are not to leave the airport. He hung up and looked at me with a reassuring nod. Now, young lady, let us see that justice is served. The next 90 minutes were the longest of my life. Arif's network moved with terrifying efficiency. Within half an hour, multiple agencies were involved. The airport security team had documented every second of the footage with official timestamps. The U.S. Embassy opened an emergency case file for a stranded minor with stolen documents. Authorities in Tokyo were briefed and began coordinating with the police at the arrival terminal. The airline itself received an alert about the situation unfolding on their flight. Everything was being codified, security tapes, witness statements, a timeline of events. It was a paper trail that would be impossible to talk their way out of. An embassy official, a woman named Ms. Patterson with a crisp, no-nonsense voice, called to speak with me directly. She explained the gravity of the situation. Abandoning a minor in a foreign country is a major international incident, she said. Your mother will face an investigation in both Turkey and Japan. Your brother, while still 17, is close enough to adulthood that his actions will be scrutinized with extreme weight. Depending on the laws back home, he could face charges for document theft and child endangerment. I listened in a daze. Charges. Investigations. International incidents. These were words from a television drama, not my life. The evidence is ironclad, Ms. Patterson continued. The footage clearly shows your brother removing your documents. There is no defense for that. The only thing left to decide is how you want to proceed once they are in custody. The evidence is ironclad, Ms. Patterson continued. The footage clearly shows your brother removing your documents. There is no defense for that. The only thing left to decide is how you want to proceed once they are in custody. How I wanted to proceed. As if I had any idea what that meant. I was 14 years old, sitting in a secure airport office, picking at my second plate of chicken and rice, trying to process the fact that my own family had committed a crime against me. A part of me, the part that had spent a decade desperate for a crumb of affection, still wanted to protect my mother. 17 years of conditioning doesn't vanish in a few hours. I kept searching for an out for her. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe Jackson had tricked her so completely that she actually believed I was a runaway. If I just talked to her, maybe she'd apologize and we could go back to being a family. But then I remembered the footage. I saw the way she didn't hesitate. I saw the way she didn't look back. And I remembered every year leading up to this moment. Every time she believed Jackson's word over mine. Every time I had tried to tell her something was wrong and she had brushed me off as being a difficult. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was the culmination of a lifetime of being second best. The anger I'd felt earlier, that small, flickering flame, was growing. It wasn't a wild, screaming rage. It was cold, steady, and sharp. It was the kind of anger that doesn't burn out. While I waited for news from Tokyo, something happened that changed everything. When the flight landed and the Japanese authorities detained Jackson and my mother, they confiscated Jackson's phone as evidence. It was standard procedure for a criminal investigation involving a minor. When they bypassed his passcode and examined his messages, they found exactly what a riff had suspected. There were texts to his girlfriend, a girl named Brittany, spanning 3 weeks before the trip. Jackson hadn't acted on a whim. He had been planning this for a month. One text read, "The trip is perfect. I'll drop her in Istanbul, and Mom will have to pick a side. She always picks me." Another, "Once Lily is out of the picture, I can finally talk Mom into the money. She trusts me completely." And the most devastating one, sent just 2 days before we left Texas, "Once I hit 18, that trust fund is mine. Lily doesn't even know it exists. If she disappears in Turkey, she won't have any legal standing to claim her share. Problem solved." When Arif read those messages to me, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Jackson wasn't just a bully, he was a predator. He had viewed me as an obstacle to money I didn't even know I had. He had decided to erase me from the equation permanently just to secure a bigger payday. What would have happened to me if Arif hadn't found me? If I had stayed a ghost in that terminal, a forgotten American teenager with no identity and no way home? I couldn't let myself go down that path. Ms. Patterson helped me understand what Jackson had been so desperate to protect. My father, before he passed away 8 years ago, had set up a trust fund for both of his children. The total value was $400,000, split equally between Jackson and me. Jackson's half, $200,000, would become accessible the moment he turned 18. That was only 3 months away. My half was structured differently. My father had tied it to educational expenses until I turned 25. I couldn't touch the principal, but it would pay for any university, graduate school, or training I wanted. It was locked away, protected from anyone else's reach. According to the texts, Jackson had spent months trying to convince our mother to consolidate the funds. His argument was that I was unstable and irresponsible, and would only waste the money on stupid art projects. He wanted Mom to petition the court to have my share transferred to his control. If I had caused an international incident in Istanbul, if I had looked like a troubled runaway, it would have been much easier to convince a judge that I couldn't be trusted with my own inheritance. My brother had tried to steal my future, and he had almost succeeded. During a quiet moment between phone calls, Arif sat down across from me. Layla had brought in a tray of tea, hot, sweet, and fragrant, nothing like the bitter coffee my mother always drank. We sat in silence for a while, the steam rising between us. I have seen family greed before, Arif said eventually. In my work, in my country, in every corner of the world. Money does not change a person's character, Lily. It simply unmasks it. It shows who they have always been. I nodded, staring into the amber liquid of my tea. But I have also seen something else, he continued softly. Your father loved you very much. I looked up, my eyes stinging. How can you know that? Because he built a fortress around you, Arif said. He made sure no one could take your future from you. Not your mother, not your brother, not anyone. He saw something coming. He may not have had a name for it, but he felt the wind changing, and he tried to protect his daughter from beyond the grave. My throat tightened. I thought about my father. I thought about the nickname. My hidden gem. I'd always thought it was just a sweet thing fathers said to their daughters. But now I understood. He had hidden me from Jackson's greed and my mother's favoritism. He had known that one day, I would need a way out. Your father believed in you, Arif said. Now, you must believe in yourself. I didn't know if I was ready for that, but sitting in that office, half a world away from home, I decided I was going to try. The monitor on the wall flickered to life. It was a live feed from the arrivals gate in Tokyo. Harsh fluorescent lights, uniformed officers waiting. An American woman in a dark suit stood with them, the consulate representative. Arif checked his watch. The plane has docked. Passengers will begin deplaning in 4 minutes. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, so hard it was difficult to breathe. 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, my mother would realize that her golden son was made of nothing but lead. I leaned forward and watched the screen, waiting for the two faces that had defined my life to emerge into the light. The screen on the wall flickered to life, showing a live feed from Tokyo's Narita airport. The arrivals gate was bathed in that harsh, unforgiving fluorescent light common to all transit hubs. A small group of officials in uniform stood waiting, accompanied by an American woman in a dark suit holding a tablet. Arif checked his watch. The plane has docked. Passengers will begin deplaning in 4 minutes. My heart began to hammer against my ribs so violently I could feel the pulse in my throat. 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, my mother would learn that her golden son was made of something far less precious than gold. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on the screen, waiting for the two faces that had defined the boundaries of my world. The first passengers trickled through the gate, looking rumpled and weary from the long-haul flight. Business travelers were already buried in their phones. Families were frantically corralling tired children. And then, I saw them. My mother emerged first. She was adjusting the strap of her carry-on, wearing that slightly dazed expression of someone who had just crossed 10 time zones. Her hair was still neat, her clothes unwrinkled. She looked exactly like a woman on the first day of a dream vacation, ready to enjoy herself. Jackson followed a few steps behind, staring at his phone and actually laughing. He didn't have a care in the world. He hadn't spent a single second thinking about the sister he had discarded 12 hours ago in a foreign terminal. They looked so normal, so relaxed, as if they hadn't just torn a family apart. The two Japanese officers and the embassy representative stepped forward to intercept them. I watched my mother's face shift in real time. First came confusion, then a flicker of annoyance, and then the beginning of genuine fear. I couldn't hear the words being spoken, but the body language told the entire story. The embassy woman was explaining the situation, that her daughter had been found abandoned in Istanbul, that the authorities had been alerted, and that this was now a formal international incident. My mother's first instinct was defense. I could see her mouth moving rapidly, her hands gesturing with sharp, frantic motions. I knew exactly what she was saying without hearing a word. There must be a mistake. She refused to come. She had a tantrum. She told us she wanted to be left alone. Jackson stood beside her, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the supportive, heartbroken older brother to perfection. I could almost hear him saying, "She's always been so dramatic. She probably did this just to get back at us. You know how she is." The lead officer produced a tablet and pressed play. I watched my mother watch the security footage. I watched her see her son wait for me to walk away before unzipping my bag. I watched her see him slide my passport into his own pocket with that small, chillingly deliberate smile. I watched her see him tuck it away as if it were nothing more than a piece of trash. The color drained from her face, fading from a flushed pink to a sickly, translucent white. Jackson tried to speak. I could see him gesturing wildly, his mouth moving at a mile a minute. He was likely spinning a new lie, that it was just a prank, a joke that went too far, that he was going to give it back later. The same hollow excuses he had used his entire life. The officer didn't blink. He simply swiped to the next screen, Jackson's text messages to Brittany. My mother read the words her son had written in the privacy of his own room. "Once Lily is out of the picture, I can finally talk Mom into the money. That trust fund is mine. She doesn't even know it exists." Sarah Miller's hand went to her mouth. Her entire body seemed to lose its structure, crumpling as if someone had cut the invisible strings holding her upright. Jackson's mask finally shattered. I had watched my brother charm his way out of trouble for 17 years. Teachers, coaches, neighbors, and our mother, everyone had fallen for that easy smile and those practiced excuses. He had never faced a consequence he couldn't manipulate his way around. But you cannot charm your way out of high-definition evidence. You cannot smile at a security camera and make it unsee what it recorded. You cannot explain away the cold, hard ambition of your own written words. Jackson's face transformed from confident to bewildered to sheer, unadulterated terror in the span of 30 seconds. His shoulders hunched forward, his hands began to shake, and he looked, for the first time in his life, like the small, hollow person he truly was. Jackson tried to step back, a reflexive move to escape the situation, but the officers were already flanking him. I thought I would feel a rush of triumph watching his world collapse, some kind of grand victory. Instead, I just felt hollow. Tired, sad, and profoundly relieved that the charade was finally over. The embassy representative held up a tablet, and suddenly, my mother's face filled the screen on a video call. She could see me. I could see her. She looked utterly broken. Her mascara was a jagged mess down her cheeks, her eyes swollen and bloodshot. She looked 10 years older than she had when we left Texas. "Lily." Her voice was a jagged whisper. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Jackson told me. He said you wanted. I thought." "You didn't check," I said. My voice was steadier than I ever imagined it could be. "You didn't come find me. You didn't ask me what happened. You just took his word for it. I know. I know. I'm so sorry. You always believe him, I said. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't even crying anymore. I was just reciting a bitter truth. You've always believed him. My entire life, you've chosen him over me. Every single time. She sobbed harder, her head dropping into her hands. Jackson stood behind her, staring at the floor, the golden boy finally tarnished. Dad would never have left me, I said quietly. He knew. He always knew what Jackson was. That's why he protected my inheritance, because he knew you wouldn't. My mother flinched as if I'd struck her. I could have said more. I could have listed every time she'd looked past me, every time I'd needed her and found her occupied with Jackson's latest crisis. But there was no point. She knew. Somewhere deep down, she had always known. She had just chosen the comfort of the lie. I'm done, I said. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being the one who doesn't matter. The representative gently took the tablet back, and the screen went black. The call was over. I sat in the silence of the office for a long time. Layla placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. Arif remained nearby, a silent, watchful presence. The legal forelight was mapped out over the next hour. Jackson would be detained and sent back to the U.S. under federal escort. His phone was logged as evidence. His case would be handled by juvenile authorities in Texas for child endangerment and theft. He was 17, old enough for the consequences to sting, young enough that he might still have a life afterward, though it wouldn't be the one he'd planned. My mother faced potential charges as well, though given my willingness to cooperate and the fact that she was a victim of Jackson's manipulation, she would likely receive a formal reprimand and mandated family counseling rather than a prison sentence. The trust fund would be placed under the oversight of a court-appointed guardian. My inheritance was safe, more than safe. It was now fortified by a legal paper trail that made it untouchable. And then there was Jackson's future. He had staked everything on his athletic career, a Division I football scholarship, the starting quarterback spot, the dream of the NFL. Those opportunities required a pristine record. This incident, documented and internationally coordinated, would follow him like a shadow. Even if the charges were eventually lowered, the record would exist. Coaches would ask questions. Background checks would reveal the truth. Everything he had tried to secure by discarding me, his status, his money, his glory, was now scorched earth. He had done it to himself, fueled by the arrogant certainty that he was too smart to get caught. Karma, it turns out, has a wicked sense of timing. Before I left the suite, Arif arranged my passage home. The embassy had issued emergency travel documents so I could fly without the passport Jackson had stolen. The airline, eager to mitigate the situation, upgraded me to first class. I would be escorted by staff every step of the way. Arif handed me a business card. It was old-fashioned, cream-colored, and elegant. If you ever need anything, he said, anything at all, you call this number. It will always reach me. Why? I asked. Why did you do all of this for me? You didn't have to. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Because you reminded me of Iller. She was kind, like you. Quiet, like you. Overlooked, like you. He paused. She would have wanted me to help someone who needed it. And you needed it. I hugged him. It was probably a breach of protocol. We had only met hours ago, and we came from vastly different worlds. But in that moment, He felt more like family than anyone I shared blood with. "You are stronger than you know, Lily," Arif said. "Your father was right. You are a hidden gem, but you will not stay hidden for much longer." The first-class flight from Istanbul back to Texas was 18 hours of surreal luxury. Warm towels, gourmet meals served on porcelain, a seat that transformed into a bed with actual linens. The flight attendants treated me with a level of care that felt alien. I kept thinking that this was the most expensive experience of my life, and I hadn't paid a single cent for it. There was likely a lesson there about how the worst storms can lead to the most unexpected shores, but I was too exhausted to find the poetry in it. I just ate, watched movies, and slept the sleep of the dead. When I finally landed in Dallas, my grandmother, Martha, was waiting at the arrivals gate. She looked older than I remembered. The year since I'd last seen her had clearly taken its toll, but her hug was exactly the same. It was strong, warm, and smelled faintly of lavender and old books. "I've got you," she whispered into my hair. "You're safe now, sweetheart. I've got you." She drove me straight to her house in Austin, not back to my mother's place in Dallas. It was a deliberate choice. I wasn't ready to face my mother yet, and Martha understood that without me having to utter a single word. My mother had returned from Japan immediately after the incident. Her vacation had ended before it even began, replaced by a grueling schedule of legal interviews, counseling appointments, and the slow-motion collapse of the family she had helped destroy through her own willful blindness. Jackson was being processed through the juvenile system back in Dallas. He'd be home eventually, but not for a long time. And when he did return, it wouldn't be to a house where I lived. For the first time in 17 years, I didn't have to exist in my brother's shadow. The relief was so heavy it made me dizzy. A week after my return, my mother drove down to Austin to see me. She looked like she had aged a decade in a matter of days. Her eyes were hollow, her hands trembled, and her clothes hung loosely on her frame, as if she'd forgotten how to inhabit her own skin. The polished, efficient hospital administrator was gone. In her place was a woman forced to stare at the wreckage of her own making. She didn't offer excuses. She didn't try to minimize what Jackson had done or explain away her own part in it. She simply sat across from me at Martha's kitchen table and spoke with a raw, quiet honesty. "I failed you, Lily. I don't know how to fix what I've broken, but I want to try. If you'll let me." I looked at her for a long time. I saw the woman who had chosen my brother over me for as long as I could remember, the woman who had boarded a plane and left me behind. But I also saw the woman who had worked double shifts to keep us fed, who had lost her husband far too young and had tried to hold the world together with nothing but grit. She was flawed and broken, but she was finally willing to admit it. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." She nodded, tears tracing lines through the dust on her cheeks. "But," I continued, "I'm willing to try. If you actually do the work. Therapy, honesty, real change. No more pretending everything is normal." "I will," she whispered. "I promise you, I will." It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a foundation. Jackson's path was simpler. He received probation until the age of 21, mandatory counseling for manipulative behavior, and hundreds of hours of community service. Most significantly, the permanent mark on his record disqualified him from his Division I scholarship. He ended up living with Martha too, eventually, though in a separate wing of the house, far away from me. Our mother couldn't look at him the same way anymore, and he had nowhere else to go. Years later, I heard he was working as a mechanic's assistant at a shop in Austin. It was honest, humble work, A world away from his dreams of quarterback glory, but perhaps exactly what he needed to become a real person. I don't feel a sense of triumph about his downfall. I just feel a quiet, enduring relief that he can no longer hurt me. 2 weeks after I returned from Turkey, Martha sat me down with a weathered wooden box filled with my father's documents. "I've been holding on to these for you," she said. "Waiting until you were old enough. Waiting until you needed them." Inside, I found the trust fund paperwork, bank ledgers, and legal filings. And at the very bottom, a letter in my father's cramped, familiar handwriting, dated just 1 week before he died. He had written it specifically for me. Even then, he had seen the rot in our family. He had watched Jackson's manipulation and the way he treated me when the adults weren't looking. He couldn't have known exactly what would happen, but he felt the shape of it. So, he had structured my inheritance with layers of protection, locking it away until I was 25 and fully independent. He had even taken out a separate life insurance policy designated solely for me, not out of favoritism, he wrote, but because he knew Jackson would always be taken care of by our mother. I was the one who would need a safety net. The letter ended with words that I carry with me to this day. "Lily, my hidden gem. You will face storms in this family, but you are built to weather them. Be patient, be strong, and know that your father loved you more than words can say. I believe in you." The total inheritance, when I finally accessed it at 25, was $600,000. It was enough to change the course of my life. I used it to start my own firm, specializing in artisan imports from the Middle East, a nod to the part of the world that saved me when I was lost. I stayed in contact with Arif Kara. He flew out for my college graduation, standing in the back row and wiping his eyes as I walked across the stage. Every year, on the anniversary of that day in Istanbul, I send him a gift. He sends me books on philosophy and leadership, always with a note reminding me of my own strength. My relationship with my mother healed slowly, with clear boundaries and regular therapy. We aren't best friends, and we likely never will be, but we are real with each other now. And in the end, that is worth so much more than the perfection we used to pretend we had.